Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 65 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Michele Neff Hernandez for this episode. And Michele is the founder and the executive director of Soaring Spirits International, which runs Camp Widow, and they do multiple locations each year. I was lucky enough to attend in San Diego in 2016, which was just about 5 or 6 months after my husband died. And I'd really encourage you to check it out if that's something. They actually do multiple locations and multiple different times of year, so do check that out. Also, I wanted to make sure to mention, and you can listen for this in the discussion, they were just supposed to hold their Florida camp in March, just a few weeks ago. And because of the global pandemic, they actually had to quickly switch it all to a virtual format. And the upside of that is that it's actually still available. All the workshop content is available right now through the end of April. There is a fee to sign up for it. But all the workshops have been recorded. They held them live and recorded them. They were all Zoom, virtual sessions. And that is still available if that is something you would like to check out, and or if you think that traveling to Camp Widow at some future point might be difficult for you, I would encourage you to check that out. We talked about so many interesting things, including Michele's own journey and how Camp Widow was founded on the back of a napkin. Also, all the other, Soaring Spirits actually has quite a few other terrific programs for widowed people as well. And I should say that they do employ the broadest possible definition of the term widowed person. So anybody who's wondering if the programs are for them, it's anybody who's lost their life partner is welcome and encouraged to participate in their programs. Also, do be sure to listen for Michele's terrific analogy about earthquakes and kind of how that applies to how adults and kids experience differently the loss of someone important to them in their life. So with that said, I'll turn it over to our discussion now, and I hope you enjoy my discussion with Michele Neff Hernandez. My guest today is Michele Neff Hernandez. Michele is the founder and executive director of Soaring Spirits International, which runs Camp Widow and many other programs. Michele's joining us from her home today in Simi Valley, California. Michele, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jenny. It's so good to be back.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad to be talking with you today. I've been looking forward to it. I'm remembering that we first met about 4 years ago, and it was when I attended Camp Widow in San Diego, and it was actually just like 6 months after my husband died, and I think it was the first kind of quote-unquote widow community thing that I had done, and it was so great to be there with all these people who just, on a base level, just get it.
Yeah, for sure. And know that you can almost finish each other's sentences, even if the only thing you know about each other is that you're both widowed.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, I remember that reminds me the first day, I think, the 4 people that I happened to be sitting next, me and 3 others, the 4 of us in the morning session, it was time for lunch, and everyone looked at each other and said, well, should we go get lunch? And everyone said, sure. So we went to this restaurant, and we were sitting out on the patio thingy and in the corner, and everyone was talking and laughing, and this one woman was telling the story about taking her husband's ashes to Hawaii and planting them under trees and things, but it was actually a funny story, right? And she was laughing, and we were all laughing, and then we looked around and we're like, oh my God, like the tables next to us were pretty close, right? And they're like, who are these crazy people laughing when they're talking about all this stuff about, widow stories?
Widow stuff. That's my favorite part about camp and about the community that's created around widowhood in a variety of ways, right? Is that there's that sense of understanding, and so often that humor that helps us make it through.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I want to talk all about that and Soaring Spirits and Camp and all your other awesome programs. But first, I'd like to talk, if you don't mind, you are also a widowed parent, and talk about how your story. So let's back way up before your life changed, before your husband died. what was life like? What was kind of normal way back then?
So I was divorced in 2000. Oh, let me think about that. No, 1997. And I met this amazing man in 2000. I had 3 kids. He had 3 kids. He and I were both track coaches. I was a personal trainer and the manager of a gym at that time. And my youngest, or my oldest child, but of the youngest, she was in the youngest age group of runners, started running track, and I agreed to be a coach for her team. And Phil, who would become my husband, was a coach for the oldest boys. And so imagine us on a track. I have like little chicken, my little chicks, and I'm trying to keep them from being run over by these massive boys that are running as fast as possible, with this guy that looks kind of like a Greek god running in front of them with a trail of boys chasing after him. So that was our introduction, really, is that we both were coaching track, and I'd been divorced 3 years and was sort of just in the midst of single parenting at that time. And then lightning struck, kind of, and I fell in love with the Greek Adonis, and then we ended up blending our family. So we married just a short time later, actually, only 6 months later. And we blended a family, which is hard work. I didn't ever think that I'd be grateful for knowing that until much later, when I was grateful again that I realized blending can be really challenging. And then we married 5 years. I ran a personal training business. He owned an air conditioning and heating business. We vacationed around races, both foot races and bike races and triathlons, all things physical. So we spent a lot of time together, which I'm super grateful for now. And then 5 years, so almost 15 years ago, this year will be 15 years, actually, August 31st, 2005. He went out for a bike ride and was hit from behind by a car. Oh. And he died less than an hour after he was hit. So that started a whole new world, for sure, of trying to figure out what to do with myself now that he was gone and I was an only parent again.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So what were those early months like, or that kind of early time period? What were some of I know it's 15 years ago, but.
Yeah, you know what? One of the things I think that I was most concerned about, and for anyone else who's been divorced and widowed, it's an interesting experience because I felt like my kids had lost 2 dads. And so I was super worried about them, what was their life experience going to be like, having experienced, when my ex-husband and I divorced, he moved pretty far away. And so Phil was their everyday dad. He was the person who took them to practice. He was the one who, was at home every day. And so for them, they were sort of set aside because people kept saying things to them like, well, at least your dad's not dead. And, they felt very much like their dad was dead, first of all. And secondly, that their grief was being kind of set aside by well-meaning adults who were trying to comfort them by recognizing that their biological father was still alive. And yet they felt so separate from other people's grief, in particular their step-siblings, because he was their biological father. And so, we had this group of 6 kids who had been raised together, and yet 3 of them were recognized as having a reason to grieve, and the other 3, were kind of trying to be comforted by the fact that their biological father was alive. So that first year was such hard work, between trying to honor, so in addition to that, the older 3 were not living with us. So they had we lived together, all 6 of us all 8 of us, 6 kids and us, for about 2 years early in our marriage. And then his kids were significantly older than mine. And so as they started moving away, one of them moved in with their mom. we had, so we would have them in varying degrees. And by the time he died, though, all of them were out of the house. And so it was just me and my 3 kids who were 14, 13, and 11 at the time. And so the older ones would visit, but they weren't in house. So the kids were like missing having their siblings there. They were missing Phil being gone. It was just kind of a mess, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've heard you talk about too is that you didn't really know any other people who were like your kind of age group and widowed.
Nope, I did not. And my only death experience had been my grandparents. And so I didn't have any grief experience. I didn't have any experience with grieving kids in any way. And so not only did I have my own grief as a widowed person, but then I didn't know what to expect from grieving kids. And, how much I think that the ongoing question for me for years, and even still, honestly, today, and they're not young anymore. They're 28, 27, and 25. But it's still, what part of this is grief? What part of whatever behavior or whatever fear or whatever anxiety or whatever sort of odd, if there's any odd behavior, it still is a question, is this grief related? Because, for kids, those delayed grief reactions as they get older and older. My daughter was recently married a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago now. She got married, and we had to figure out, how was Phil going to be part of the wedding? And so, 14 years after his death, we're still facing new things where we wish that he was there, and we find our way through acknowledging him in a way that makes sense for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, it reminds me of a conversation you and I had, and it was a while ago now. I think it was right around when I was getting the podcast started. And you had a really interesting analogy about earthquakes. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes so much sense to me. Well, first of all, I'll start by saying, again, I'm from California. So earthquakes are one of the things that happen here. But I think that the difference for families is that when an adult experiences the death of a spouse or partner, it feels like an earthquake that happens all at once. It's the big one. And your whole life is in disarray, and everything is upside down, and nothing is where it's supposed to be, and you're having to kind of climb through the rubble to recreate a life for yourself and your family. Where for the kids, it's more like they're experiencing the small tremors that come after every earthquake, and those aftershocks go on for years and years. And so you don't know, So to come back to the reality for us of Caitlin getting married. We wouldn't have been able to, at the time when Phil died, I could imagine old things. Like I think in my brain, there was like a running total of like, and he's going to miss this, and he's going to miss that, and he's going to miss this. But for the kids, they don't think about that until the time comes. And then we're at, graduations, or we're at, Caitlin and I ran our first marathon. We would have loved that. So the kind of things that you can't really predict, and that the kids don't think about until they're in it, until they're old enough and they're mature enough to recognize, what's missing from their lives in that time as it relates to the parent who's died.
Well, that analogy really resonates with me. I think I was actually in a big earthquake down your way. It was 1992, and it was
Was it Northridge?
I think that's the one. Yeah, it was by whatchamacallit, Palm Springs, like that. Well, anyway, there was a huge earthquake, and there was that initial, oh my gosh, what's happening? But I thought the most destabilizing part was the tremors day after day. And I was at a conference, so I couldn't really, I was there for several more days.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking now about, with this idea that kids, then how destabilizing that is to continually have these tremors as they hit different developmental milestones or different activity, milestones as they go through life and stuff. That really makes a lot of sense.
And also I like that word of destabilizing, because really the other thing you're trying to do as a parent is build, safety and stability back into the kids' lives after that everything has been disrupted. And so these ongoing tremors are a challenge for every widowed parent, first of all, because as the adult, you've sort of experienced the big one yourself, right? So you've walked yourself mentally, at least, through some of what the kids are now experiencing. And so I found that every time my kids would go back into, a grief period that was related to their now developmental understanding of Phil not being present physically in their lives, I also had to be pulled back then because they needed my love and support to be able to process. So I feel like one of the biggest challenges for widowed parents is finding ways to support ourselves while we're supporting our kids, because we keep continually being revisited with the tremors. They're not going through those tremors by themselves. So, we get both the big impact initially, and we also continue on with those tremors, which can trigger for ourselves as adults, our own feelings of grief. And also, that desire we have to fix for our kids and to be able to provide them with this completely safe, beautiful nest. At least for me, it was the first time I realized, like, this is not something I can fix. We just have to walk through it together because it can't be fixed. I can't bring them back. I can't undo what's been done. I can't change how they feel about it. All I can do is witness and support and be willing to help them access resources as they developmentally understood the impact of his death.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think that's really amazing. So I'll just leave it at that. I want to go back to after you were widowed and you didn't know anybody who was in your similar situation. I think you ended up getting connected somehow or other through some distant connection, somebody. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially what happened was I couldn't find anybody. I kept thinking if only widowed people would walk around with a W on their head. I feel sure there's one near me somewhere, but I can't find them. And so I set out initially to write a book. And because I had these 50 questions that I wrote, and I wanted to ask every widowed person I could meet these 50 questions, which were all really practical questions around how long do you wear your wedding ring? I was really consumed with what to do with his shoes because he was a shoe aficionado and he had more shoes than I did. So I had all these really practical questions that I want to ask somebody who had experienced this. And so I set out on this crazy journey to just start interviewing people. And during that time, my brother-in-law's cousin experienced the death of her husband, and we'd never met. And actually she was through a strange family connection, not really connected to the family at that time. When my brother-in-law reconnected with family members he didn't know he had, he found this cousin who ended up being widowed just shortly after I was, 2 months after I was. And so my sister reached out and said, could you please reach out to her? So here's another irony of the story. Her name is also Michele. So we share the same name. We were widowed the same year, and we were both parenting grieving kids at the same time. And so we connected by email, which turned into phone calls, which turned into having spoken to each other every day for the last 15 years. So she's been an extra special gift of this experience. And really what came from those interviews, I did about 30 interviews over a 1 year period of time. What came from those interviews was a community and my beginning to understand what it was like to sit down with someone who had had the same experience. And it didn't matter how similar the details were. What mattered was that they had experienced the death of their spouse or partner. And if we had that in common, whenever I sat down to do one of these interviews, I'm sure you've experienced this. Like you sit down, you start talking, and before you know it, an hour has passed and you think, you've shared all of these similarities and you walk away feeling less alone than you did when you began. And that experience happened to me 30 times with these 30 interviews. And I thought, if only I could bring people together so that it would be easier to find widowed people, because that's what set me on my journey, was trying to find other widowed people. So I thought, I really want to make it possible for it to be easier to find widowed people. So, this is 15 years ago. And there's no Facebook, and, people are connecting through websites, but you have to, do contact us and get on the mailing list. There's not a lot of online communities available at this time. And what I found with local grief groups was that it just depended on who happened to have died at the time that you experienced your loss. So you may or may not find a younger widowed person in a grief group, depending on, what the makeup of your community was at that time. So that's how the next steps of my journey started to unfold, which is the founding of Soaring Spirits.
Well, and I think I read, can you tell us, you and Michele were in the car, I think, visiting, and you came up with this Camp Widow idea. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we had just visited Daniel's graveside.
That's Michelle's husband.
Yeah, Daniel is Michelle's husband. They live in Austin, Texas. And I was visiting Austin, which once we connected, we started to and fro in each other's states. And our other friends would tease that, we saw the person who lived outside of our state more often than we saw the people who lived nearby. But, we connected when we were 4 and 6 months widowed. So really, we walked through every one of those early milestones together. And so to and froing from each other's states was part of that. So I happened to be in Texas, and we were coming back from visiting Daniel's grave. And I was talking about having completed all the interviews and just having this vision of what would it be like if you brought people together? Like, how would you even do that? Is it an event? What is it? And so in the car on the way, so it's about a 2-hour drive from her house to the place, this beautiful little church. It's actually where they got married, the beautiful church where he's buried. So we had a good long drive. So I'm writing on napkins in the car as we're talking. I'm like, I think it's kind of like a conference. And she was like, well, what kind of, are they picking workshops? And we're like, okay, let's talk about what kind of workshops would be good. So we start talking about all these, and I said, I think we need to have like a dance. And she looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like, well, because you can't dress up, you don't go anywhere. You feel like you have to have a date. What if we had like a thing where no date was required and you could just dance for a minute and be lighthearted? And so, of course, as I said, I was a personal trainer, so I thought a 5K would be a really good idea as well. But I didn't realize at the time was each one of these is like a huge planning, logistical nightmare. So to combine them all is really an interesting challenge. But so by the time we got home from that drive, I had mapped out Camp Widow almost as it exists today. I mean, we've definitely made some adjustments as we've learned from our community, but by and large, the structure is pretty much what we dreamed up as we were driving along the roads in Austin, Texas.
On the back of the napkins. Well, it's fun to hear about, because many of the elements you just mentioned, I saw in that Camp Widow that I went to in 2016. You talked about I think you called it the Run for Your Life 5K, and Run for Your Life, right?
So we did Run for Your Life. We've switched it since then to Run for Your Love. And so people put on pictures of their loved ones on them. We have community members in the local San Diego area come to the run, and they honor their people, whomever they want to include. We've had grandsons run for their grandfathers, and it's been a really cool thing. But yeah, you're right. We did have a Run for Your Life, and really the purpose of the 5K is to kind of physically embody the sense of moving forward, of taking one step after another, and recognizing that the grief experience is just one baby step after another. And so to be able to embody that and to also access the endorphins that are available through physical movement, in particular after they've done 2 full days at this point of grief processing, to be able to physically move after that and, kind of put your energy towards physical movement. It's just such a great way to help process some of those strong emotions that have been surfacing over the workshop times, and even the connections they make with other widowed people, because you find often that you're more free with your words. You don't feel as limited if you're talking to someone else who's had a similar experience. And so that often opens, conversations that you've maybe not had with anyone else before.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of workshops, and actually let's clarify first, it's called Camp Widow, but this is not camping, right?
It is camping at the Marriott. That's how I camp. Yes, not camping. The reason it's called Camp Widow actually is kind of a funny story. The first conference we did, at that time I thought, well, I want people to know this is serious business. And even though we do have a dance and a 5K, and I wanted them to feel like what the information we were presenting was valuable. So we called it the National Conference on Widowhood for the first one. Which we were told by our attendees we needed a new name. So
that didn't sound cool enough.
Yeah, well, it sounded too serious. They were a little bit worried about whether they were just going to fall asleep in their chairs. So it was actually 5K morning, and at that time we bused people to the 5K location. So we had 2 buses out in front of the Marriott. People were loading the buses, and I don't know why. I'm not sure why, but I had a whistle on. Like, I think I must have had my coach whistle on. So I had my whistle on, and I had a clipboard, and I was counting because we were definitely driving away from the hotel and coming back. I needed to make sure I had everybody on. So I was counting and, kind of standing at the front of the bus. And one of the attendees looked at another one and said, well, my daughter went to camp and I went to camp too. And the other person said to her, what camp did you go to? And she said, well, look around. I'm at Camp Widow. So from that day forward, it's been called Camp Widow. And to be clear, widow actually is a word that's used to describe the experience for both people who identify as male and female. So it is for any person who has experienced the death of a spouse or partner. So the Camp Widow experience was born that weekend, that first time we did it. And then we've done, I think we're up to 26 camps.
Wow, that's awesome. So we talked about the run and the dance. Can you just give us a flavor of like some of the workshops or what people could expect if they can?
So we always talk about really practical stuff, and we address widowhood from a holistic point of view. So you're going to hear about everything from taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally. We do workshops on writing. We do workshops on meditation. We do workshops about finances and parenting and dating and yoga. What else have we done? Creating the life you love, managing your support network, being able to make decisions with that, talking about making good decisions, since many people are missing the sounding board, the person that they would have made decisions with. Also decision exhaustion, which is definitely a thing, I think, for widowed people who are constantly being called to make whatever the next decision is for themselves or their families. So every camp has a mixture of workshops designed to address finances, parenting, dating, holistic care, and the creating of a life that you love post-loss. So around those 5 topics, everything kind of swirls. We also always address, in particular, traumatic losses. So as that relates to either type of death, like suicide or homicide, complications in regards to the state of your relationship at the time of your person's death. Some people were separated or even divorcing or divorced, but still a part of each other's lives and impacted by the death of their partner. So we address always the traumatic losses as well and build workshops around that to be able to support people, provide those extra supports for traumatic losses that kind of add another element to the grief process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think you've also got a good, mix of attendees who are early in their loss and kind of medium term and longer term as well.
So another thing that we have done in the last couple of years, in 2017, we founded the Soaring Spirits Resilience Center on the campus of Schreiner University. And the purpose of the center is to research the widowed condition and to identify factors that build resilience in widowed people. And through that work, we have identified some tracks that we use for planning the Camp Widow workshops. So the first one is for newly widowed, and we identify people as newly widowed if they've been widowed for less than 1 year. And then we have a track for recently widowed, and that is people who've been widowed between 1 and 3 years. Then we have a track for middle widowed, and this is that 3 to 5 year period where you've been widowed long enough that most people are assuming you're doing well and you're fine, and really you're still in the midst of rebuilding and trying to figure out what is this for you, and what kind of life are you building for yourself and your family. And then we have seasoned widowed, which is 5 years and over, and that means you've been walking this road for at least 5 years, and you're still learning and you're still growing, and you're also often in the opportunity or in an opportune place to be able to give back to people who are widowed or less time than you. So we will have always all 4 of those tracks, and the workshops are sort of planned around that. We tend to have a pretty good sprinkling of people throughout each one of those timeframes. One of the unique things about the Camp Widow experience, and actually really widowhood as a whole, but in regards to Camp Widow, we have about a 40% return rate. So most people at a camp, there'll be 60% who are new campers and 40% who've attended at some other time. And I think that just addresses that evolution of the widowed experience. So the people in your life may assume that this first year, you know, you're going to kind of experience all the things you're going to experience. But the truth is, you continue to evolve through your widowhood as you evolve through your life. And so at different points, you're going to need different things from your widowed community. And Soaring Spirits and Camp Widow in particular is always a place for people to come to whenever they need access to their community, their widowed community, or to a particular topic that they may be struggling with. Many times people will come to us after the 5 years and more mark because they're blending a family and walking through what that looks like, blending their widowed experience with someone else's whatever experience, whether it's widowed or divorced or never been married, or they're blending a family and trying to identify how do they continue to stay connected to their loved one that they still love and miss, and also welcome or make space for welcoming love. So we get people from all distances from their loss, all over the world. We've had, I think, probably attendees from about 10 or 12 countries. And pretty much always there's a number of attendees from various countries that will attend. And then all the states in the US, all the provinces in Canada, so all over North America, and then, probably 10 to 12 different destinations around the world.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. And just to wind up on the Camp Widow piece, where and when do you hold these camps?
We do 6 camps a year right now. So 3 standing locations, which is San Diego, California. That was our first one. That one actually this year will be coming up in July. At this point, we're still planning on holding it if all the numbers kind of roll out as we're expecting in our current state. We do one in Toronto, Ontario, and then we do one in Tampa, Florida. So those are our 3 standing locations. This year we also did Los Angeles. We're scheduled to have one in Australia, but that one is going to be delayed based on what's going on in the world right now. And then another one in Colorado in September. And that one is still scheduled.
Okay. And Toronto is usually in the fall and Florida is usually in the March timeframe?
Correct, yeah. Spring is our Florida location, and then late fall, early winter is Toronto. It's beautiful.
Okay, so for planning purposes, listeners can be thinking about checking out your website and looking up those dates.
Yeah, absolutely. On campwidow.org, you'll find all of the dates and our various locations, and also updates as they relate to which events are going to be impacted by the current world situation.
Well, and speaking of that, actually, right now, I think there is a short-term opportunity for people to access some of this Camp Widow content. Can you just tell us briefly about what you've had to do with your Florida camp, which just happened, and what people could, still access there if they want to do that?
Absolutely. We're scheduled to have our in-person Camp Widow in Tampa, March 20th to the 22nd. The Thursday before that date, the truck was supposed to leave from Simi Valley and head to Florida. And the Wednesday before the truck was leaving on Thursday, things were starting to really look like what at the time was looking like a bad flu was going to turn into a worldwide pandemic. And it became really clear that having an in-person event was not going to be safe. And then that sort of panned itself out over the next couple of weeks for sure. So we decided that we just couldn't hold the in-person event, which was soul crushing for me and for so many people who had been really looking forward to being together. And then we just decided, my personal driving sort of passion is serving widowed people. And I just could not imagine telling people who had been waiting for this event that we had nothing for them. So we decided to turn the in-person event into a virtual event. So in a week, we recorded, we ran live workshops over the March 20th to 22nd timeframe. We ran I think we have about 32 different workshops, and we had a pirate dance party, and we did a virtual 5K. So we kind of tried to include all of our elements of Camp Widow. We did a cooking segment, which is really cool, and we also provided a whole page of resources to increase calm and comfort during times of uncertainty, which is accessible free on the Camp Widow website. So with this virtual event, what we then did was opened it up for people to be able to attend virtually. Because we had already charged our registration fee for our Tampa camp, we did include a charge for the virtual camp so that people who have already purchased a registration could get their value. But it's a much lesser fee than what we usually charge for our in-person events, because obviously we didn't have any of the food costs or anything like that. So for $150, the access to the 2 days of content is available and will be available till April 30th. So that's called Camp Widow Virtual, and it is on the Camp Widow website under locations. That took the place of our Tampa event this year, and we already have dates for our Tampa event next year, so those will be posted on the Camp Widow site soon.
Okay, so a terrific opportunity then for people who may, for whatever reason, not be feasible to travel to one of the in-person camps, could right now access your programming by registering, and I think you said it's going to be available until the end of April.
Since our shelter in place is currently scheduled to be through April 30th, we are keeping our workshops open until April 30th. So to be clear, they were all run live and we recorded them. So right now there's recordings for every single one of those workshops available on the virtual campsite. The nice thing about it, which is kind of a side effect that we didn't really think about in the 1 week we had to turn it around, was just that usually when you go to camp, you would only be able to choose one workshop in any given time frame. And so you will probably have 4 workshops in one day, so maybe a total of 8 over the weekend. And because these are all recorded, everyone has access to everything. So you don't have to choose just one. You can pick and choose. You can watch some of one. You can watch some of another. You can watch the whole thing. You can watch all of them if you want. We did cut the workshop times down, so they're 45 minutes long with 30 minutes of content and then 15 minutes of Q&A with whatever presenter was offering their expertise. So the great thing about the virtual camp is that people have access to many, many more workshops than they usually would if they were at an in-person event.
Yeah. Okay. Terrific. Well, we'll put the link for sure in the show notes and encourage people to check that out. You mentioned the Soaring Spirits Resilience Center, and I did want to ask, you guys have developed some kind of I think you call it the Soaring Spirits Widowed Resilience Scale. Can you tell us about that? Because I think that sounds interesting.
Oh my gosh, it was so exciting. This is one of my favorite pieces of work that have come out of the center. And it began with me being asked a number of questions over the years of around the trauma scales. So a lot of times when people are being evaluated as to how they're handling a challenging situation, there's self-evaluation tools, and many of them are focused on trauma. How are you processing a trauma? The thing was that they would ask questions like, I actively seek to replace all the losses in my life. Which, if you're talking about your dead husband, that's not one I really want to replace. And so a lot of the questions and other things like, I feel that I am in control of most of the things in my life. And so there were a number of questions that kept kind of pushing my buttons. And so I was working at the time with a researcher who, Dr. Carrie West, who did her research for her dissertation at Camp Widow. So she was a communications major. She asked if she could do a study on resilience or on life satisfaction specifically for widowed people. And so I agreed because she was a widow and she was working to increase and to get her degree. And I thought, well, it would be really cool if widowed people could help a widowed person achieve her goals. That was really my only motivation for doing this. I wasn't introduced yet to the power of what we could do with research. And so my connection with Carrie led to me answering a lot of these other questions that I was just mentioning around trauma scales. And I kept saying to Carrie, these are awful questions. Widowed people are never going to answer that in the way that is intended to show that they're making progress through a traumatic experience. And so fast forward a couple of years, we've done a few more studies, we've done a few more surveys, and I said to Carrie, we just have so much information, we need to do something with it. And I said, what if we could create our own scale about resilience, for widowed people specifically, so that the language isn't so jarring. And instead of setting up a goal that is not something they want to achieve, like replacing a loved one in their life, how about if we made something that, they thought, yeah, I want to be able to say yes to that. Just as an example, one of our questions is, I'm able to laugh every day. Mm-hmm. And so even if you're not able to laugh every day, you can see why maybe you might want to laugh every day. Where when I was asked the question, I actively seek to replace the losses in my life, I could understand what the intent of the question was, but it was never one that I was going to feel great about saying, yes, I 100% agree. And so what we created instead was a resilience scale. It's a self-assessment tool. It's available for free on the Soaring Spirits Resilience website. You can find that from Soaring Spirits website easily. There's a big box for it, and it will take you to the assessment. You can assess yourself. What's cool is that you can use the online assessment, and then you'll be sent back some suggestions around how you might build resilience in the areas where you have some room for growth. So it's been super cool to be able. So one of the things that's most unique about what we did is that we used the language that widowed people used when they answered our surveys to create these questions. So people who have taken the survey have reported that they feel like they're talking to a friend. They feel like these, the words resonate with them, which we loved hearing, of course, because that was the whole point. The whole point was, let's give widowed people a way to assess their resilience that helps them feel like they're being understood as they're taking the question, as they're answering the questions, rather than setting up an ideal to which they may not want to aspire. And so people are taking the survey every day. So like I said, you get an automatic response that will kind of help you evaluate what each one of those areas means and ways that you could continue to work in that area. We have still so much work to do at the center. We have a lot of big plans around what we'll do with the scale. But one thing that was really exciting was that it was published in the Omega Journal of Death and Dying. And you never know when. So we knew that the article was accepted. We didn't know for sure when it would be published, but it ended up being published on September 11th. Oh. So we thought that was just a beautiful synchronicity.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, that sounds fascinating. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for sure, because it sounds like a really practical, especially how, you guys aren't just collecting survey for your research. You're actually responding with suggestions based on the way the person answered of things they could do to build that resilience in their life.
For sure. And also, Soaring Spirits was really kind of built on this idea of offering practical support. So the Resilience Center's work is, yes, to do the research, but then to take that research and turn it into practical action. And so the resilience scale is the first piece of that work, but also the whole new format for this Camp Widow workshop schedule is also coming directly from the research that we've done at the center. And so we're really taking that research and using it to sort of shape the direction that widowed people take towards areas that we know build resilience. Yeah. And so, that's why we have a self-care track. That's why we have a trauma track in our workshop planning. It's also why we do things like building your support network, because having people around you to support you is one of the significant ways that we can build resilience. And for many widowed people, and especially like now in a time of isolation, but so often widowed people find themselves isolated from family and friends. And so we have to train ourselves to build a support network that matters to us. And to be able to know that these are people we're going to be able to reach out to. And so, there's the challenge of asking for help, and people getting just exhausted by the number of times they have to ask for help and overextending their community. And oftentimes that may be just what we feel. Maybe your community is feeling fine about how much you're asking for help, but it's a way, one of the workshops that we built based directly on our research was building your support network to help people identify, okay, some of the people I'm going to get support from are friends and family. Other people are going to be my widowed community. Other people are going to be professionals that I hire for this job or that job. So it's about figuring out how to outsource. What can I outsource? In what ways can I outsource to reduce the draw of my own energy to be able to have those breaths that you need as a widowed person and certainly as a solo parent.
I'm just thinking as you're talking about, I mean, this is really incredible. And just thinking about how it all started on the back of a napkin in a drive in Texas.
100%. I still have the napkin.
Oh, good. I hope you have it framed on your wall somewhere.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, look, you guys have so many other things going on. We probably could talk all day, but if you could just maybe tell us briefly, you have a pen pal program. What's that? Mm-hmm. Tell us briefly about your blog and tell us briefly about your packets for new widows.
Okay, great. I'm happy to do all of those things. So we work really hard to make sure that any widowed person comes to us is going to be able to find something valuable. So we recognize that not everybody's going to be able to come to Camp Widow, and we want to make sure that we have online free resources that all you need is web access to be able to be a part of those communities. So the first one is our Widowed Village Forum. That is an online format for similar to Facebook looking, but private for widowed people. You have to be approved to join. It is open to Google, so you are still able to see it, but not to interact unless you are an approved member. And that provides people with an automatic connection around a number of things, whether it's how your person died or how old you are or how long you've been widowed. There's lots of discussions going on in Widowed Village every day, all the time. People from all over the world. That program's accessed by 153 different countries. So that's really the place where we are most global, is in our Widowed Village. Attached to Widowed Village is a Widowed Pen Pal program. This is the very first program we ever started. I thought for sure it was going to be gone by now, but no, it is not. People still want it. And what this is an opportunity to be connected to someone who is within 10 years of you in age, who has been widowed within 6 months of you and has the same family situation regardless of having children or not having children. And this is all based on my relationship with Michele. When we first met, we didn't know each other at all. We started by communicating by email. And we thought, well, if it worked for us, maybe it will work for other people. And still to this day, there are people who come to Camp Widow and say to me, I would like you to meet my widowed pen pal. And so they met, by pen pals through the program, and then ended up deciding that they were both going to travel from wherever they were to Camp Widow to meet in person. They plan travel together. It's an incredible continuing program. Like I said, this is our oldest standing program, started in 2008. And still ongoing. So you can request a pen pal. Basically what happens is you put in your details, you get the email addresses of 3 people immediately, you reach out to those 3. So you then also become part of the pool. And so you may also get a random email from someone who got your email address when they signed up for the pen pal program. So that's the pen pal program. We also, as far as I know, we have the largest collection of blogs written by widowed people in the world. We have been blogging every single day for 15 years, and those blogs are all stored and sorted by topic and by author. And so you can go to the Widow's Voice blog, click on Newly Widowed, and every post that's ever been written about being newly widowed will come up there. Let's say that you want to talk about parenting. Click on the parenting button, and every single post that's ever been written about parenting will come up there. And so you get this really great cross-section of different people writing. We've had probably close to 50 or 60 writers over the years. And so you have a lot of different writers. You have a lot of different perspectives. You have a lot of different experiences. And you're able to kind of sort through them and figure out which ones matter to you. In addition, every day we have a new post going up. So Right now we have a team of 8 writers, actually, with 8 writers, and they are all assigned their own day. We do have a couple who are both widowed, met at Camp Widow, and are engaged to be married. They share a day. So sometimes he writes, sometimes she writes. That's Mike and Sarah. So it just gives a really unique perspective on what it's like to be widowed from every different walk of life. We currently have a writer who is widowed and experienced the death of her daughter after her husband's death. And so she's writing from the perspective of grieving both her husband and her daughter, and also, grieving her daughter without her husband. And, it's a beautiful raw sharing of the pain of that kind of experience. So we have a man who is gay and writes about the loss of his husband. And so, like I said, all different types of experiences. At Soaring Spirits, we really employ the largest possible definition of the word widowed. So any person who has experienced the death of a spouse or partner is welcome in our programs. We don't care about your status. We don't care about your religious beliefs. We don't care about your sexuality. All we care about is the fact that you've experienced this death and that you're seeking a community of support to move through. So that's our Widow's Voice blog. And as I said, it's being written every single day. So right now we're also writing about this time of life that we're struggling through with the coronavirus. All of our writers are, processing that in their own ways. And so writing about that. So really, it's a real-time look at widowed life from 7 or 8, depending on how many writers we have at any given time, but 7 or 8 different perspectives.
Yeah.
And then the Newly Widowed Packets, that is one of our newer programs, though it's been running for about 3 years. And that is a packet that a newly widowed person can request to be mailed to them for free. And it will include a welcome to the Soaring Spirits programs, a detailed accounting of what we offer. It has a booklet with words of comfort written from other widowed people. So we have probably about 50 quotes from widowed people offering support to another widowed person. And then a lot of different, we have the Building Your Support Network document, which helps you start to build your support network, as well as a newly widowed checklist, just some things to consider within the first 6 months. So those packets are, like I said, mailed out for free. The one thing we don't do, we do not send them out unsolicited. So if a person says, oh, my sister's widowed, I would like a packet for her, what we ask them to do is mail the packet to themselves, and then they deliver it to the person they would like to have the packet. I tell people it's kind of like when AARP finds out you're turning 50 and you start getting random mail from AARP and you're like, what? This is not for me. Except for it's way worse if that mail comes to you and it's about being widowed and you have not requested it, because it already can feel, like an experience that makes you so vulnerable that we don't mail information about widowhood to widowed people unless they request it. So that's the only caveat for the newly widowed packets. But otherwise, we've been sending, I would say, probably between 300 and 500 a month out every single month.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
They fly out the door.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Terrific. Good. Well, thank you for talking, running through those programs with us, and I'll be sure to put a link to all of that in the show notes. And let's just wrap up here with this question. If you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, you can't break your kids. And be gentle with yourself and with them. I remember just wanting to fix it for them so badly. And what I realized was, kind of as I went along, really, was that if I could just be witness with them, if I could sit with them and let them sit with me, that the comfort we found in each other was the most powerful comfort I had to offer. And so comfort each other and remember that there's no perfect answer, and be as kind to yourself as you can, as you do the best you can with what you have in front of you on what feels like sometimes an impossible task. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's actually a great place to end. So my guest today is Michele Neff Hernandez, founder and executive director of Soaring Spirits International, which runs Camp Widow and many, many other programs for widowed people. So Michele, where can listeners find Soaring Spirits and Camp Widow, including if they want to register for the virtual Camp Widow available right now? Where can they find you guys? You'll find everything you could possibly want about Soaring Spirits at soaringspirits.org. So Soaring and Spirits is plural.org. All of our resources are available from that, including the Widowed Resilience Center, Camp Widow. When you go to the Camp Widow link, it'll take you to campwidow.org. And from there, under locations, the virtual camp is the very first one.
Perfect. Okay. Well, Michele, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Jenny, I love your work. Thank you so much for including me on the Widowed Parent podcast. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Michele Neff Hernandez as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 65. And today, a special shout out to listeners in Portugal, Spain, France, and Italy. I'm really glad you guys are here. Glad to have you listening. And please do reach out and let me know if there's any topics or any local resources in your locations that I can spread the word about. And I hope you guys are managing okay over there. I've been trying to follow the news and keep up with that. So just know that I'm thinking about you guys over there in Europe. For everyone, I hope that you've had a chance to catch some of the pandemic special episodes that I've done. The most recent one was about the book. It's a free ebook, actually. I have a question about coronavirus for younger kids. Also, a discussion with Julie Lithcott-Hames about older teens and young adults, and then two terrific discussions, one with the Dougie Center and one with Hummingbird Center for Hope, about grief in the pandemic there. So I do plan to have some more of those episodes coming up. I haven't recorded any of those the last few days. I had actually a really busy week last week with a number of regular longer episodes. And also, I have picked back up my draft of my memoir. Some of you may know that I was working on the draft last August, and I actually got the whole first draft done. Last August, I challenged myself to write 1,000 words a day for the month of August, and I wasn't really sure if that was going to be enough time or not enough time, but I figured I needed to do something to get started. And it's kind of been sitting since then for various reasons, and I've been thinking about it and realizing that this book about parenting through my husband's terminal illness is kind of more broadly about parenting through a health crisis when your world turns inward and upside down. And that sounds kind of like a lot of the world right now. So I have a renewed effort to work on the editing process for that, and try to get that moving forward so that I can be done with it and get it out and available out in the world. So anyway, that's what's going on here. I hope you're managing well enough wherever you are. And thank you very much for listening. And until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.